So today I got a question in my inbox from someone who had gotten one of my preset packs about how you can apply parameter changes, how you can assign them to a stomp switch on the HX Stomp. Now, this prompted me, and thank you Dan for the inspiration here, to make a video about why I choose to use Stomp Switch Mode on the HX Stomp versus Snapshot. I think if you've got one of the bigger units like the Helix Floor, you've got like 10 different switches, right? Or the LT, you've got 8. I think that makes more sense there to use Snapshot mode because it's just one button switch and it takes you to that stock sound that you want. But on the smaller units where we're really restricted, you know, we just have 3 buttons here unless you're expanding with MIDI or an external switch. We've really just got 3 snapshots if you're in snapshot mode. So that's 3 sounds, that's it, right? If you're using Stomp Switch mode, we can have the blank slate of the preset, which is none of these buttons engaged. And then for each button, we can have parameter changes or effect engages, and effectively, by all the different combinations, we can get up to 8. So real quick, I'll run through that. The stock sound of the preset would be no buttons engaged. Then we'd have the first button, just the second button, just the third button. That's 4 sounds already. Then we can do combinations, so we can do the first 2, Stomp Switch 2 and 3, Stomp Switch 1 and 3, and then lastly all 3 together. That's 8 combinations if I'm doing my math correctly. So in my mind, it makes a lot more sense to use Stomp Switch mode on the HX Stomp. I'm gonna get to the HX Edit program. I'll show you how to set up the parameter changes, and I'll give you a free preset too since you're watching this video. As I was setting this up, I realized I actually wanted to show you guys 2 presets just to make the most of this video. The first one is going to be showing off how I'm using Stomp Switch mode to make the most different combinations of sounds with just those 3 foot switches. Second preset is going to be using a little bit more in-depth controls with parameter changes with the Stomp Switches. So this first one is an acoustic type preset that I use when I work at churches and stuff. And it's what I like to call an all-in-one rig. So essentially I bring the acoustic guitar and the HX Stomp. That's it. No other effect pedals, no amp. The acoustic guitar, HX Stomp into the front board, and it goes through front of house. So this is a very basic worship patch, I think. I use noise gates on pretty much all my acoustic patches just to be safe in case it gets, you know, feedback crazy on stage and it doesn't hurt the top of the guitar, which can happen if it gets terrible. I use the 3 Sigma Audio Impulse Response package that copies a Martin D45. There's my settings for that. I know a lot of people that have my preset library like to get that pack too. It's sick. It's like $10, totally worth it. But if you don't use impulse responses, here is my custom EQ curve that I've been using to kind of simulate that. It improves the sound of an acoustic guitar, I think. So obviously the impulse response is always on. My compressor block here, there's the settings for that. That's always on. And then the plate verb is always on. Not too loud in the mix, it's at 20%, but it is very long. All right, and then let's get into the stomp switches now. So this is the bass sound. This is with no stomp switches engaged. Can you see this in the video? The first stomp switch is going to control a Memory Man style delay here. There's the settings for that. Bypass controller assign page. This is what this would look like. It's very simple, right? Just bypasses for all these. So again, the settings for the Elephant Man. It's not very percussive sounding. It just adds a little bit of a pad, I think, to the sound. My thought mode, you know, working in churches is I feel like the guitar parts just get progressively more wet and wet as you go. So in this patch especially, it's just, there's a lot of different combinations of stuff we can use to achieve that. So there's the delay. This is what I would probably turn on first if I was going to stray from like the stock sound. I would go with this delay first. If you want a more wet sound, here's the glitz verb, which I've put in there to kind of emulate the way the bloom setting on the Strymon Big Sky works. It's a very modulated reverb and it's very long. Especially with plenty of pre-delay here, it kind of gets that effect, the blooming effect that that preset from the Big Sky does do. And if you want to, you can combine Elephant Man and the glitz, so Stomp Switches 1 and 2, to get even more of a wet effect. Let's turn those off. I keep trails on, by the way, too, so it doesn't sound like it's just a quick chop stop. The next preset, this is kind of emulating the way a Boss slow gear works. It's an auto swell, so it detects the input voltage of the guitar, and then it'll react to it. So if you hit a strong chord, it'll swell in. I have the mix at 85%, so you actually do hear the onset just a little bit, and then it fills in with the full sound of the instrument. So this is an effect working as an expression pedal would in the worship context, how a lot of people use it anyway. And of course you can combine this with the glitz verb. You can combine it with the Elephant Man, the Memory Man style delay. I just love that delay because it has some chorusing in it too, and it's just on the repeats. And if you wanted to, you can combine all three effects, so it's Elephant Man, glitz, swell. For those really big sections. So just a quick demo of that patch. Let's move on to the next one. Now here is my slide preset, and if you've been watching the channel for a while, you might have seen this one already, but this is a great example of how I would use stomp switches to control parameters. There's a ton of stuff happening in this screen, the bypass and controller assign. I'm going to run through the settings in case you're trying to copy this at home, then you can get a chance to do that. Input impedance, I don't use a noise gate for this one. And then we've got a split chain here. This is happening just to pass through the dry signal. I'll talk about this in a second, with a dual stage compressor with these blocks. Deluxe comp and the LA Studio comp. This is very common for slide playing to use more than one compressor. And then eventually the parametric EQ, which is bypassed right now. Again, we'll talk about that in a second. This block here, the conjoining block here between the wet and the dry paths, this controls, what percentage you're getting wet and dry. Goes into the amp block, the divided duo with the accompanying cabinet. No, this is the one from the Dr. Z cabinet. I matched them up differently here. There's all the settings for those. And then finally an always on hall verb. And in fact, we actually have an extra block here if you want to, throw in an extra effect, always on, or if you're using an external pedal to control the stomp. This preset I like to use in combination with other effect pedals, so not as an all-in-one package, although you could do that if you just need a very basic tone. This is what I would use in my full rig if I were playing out and I wanted to use the HX Stomp for my amp tones. So I designed this preset to kind of emulate the compression settings the way my Origin Effects slide rig compressor, which is a really expensive 1176 style compressor pedal that I love. This preset was built to emulate that. Let's talk about how the stomp switches are set up very quickly. It's pretty simple for numbers 2 and 3. Number 3 is a solo boost. I add a little bit of presence in with the effect block here. So this would be 1.8 and 3.5. I'll show you how to pull this up. If you wanted to add a change with the presence, we would go to the amp block here, click on bypass, that's the stock setting, but you would want to change the presence controller, assign this to footswitch 3, and then we would go minimum presence, set that at 1.8. So minimum is the setting at which the it would be set at if the stomp switch were not engaged. When you want presence to come up to 3.5, you'd set it to 3.5, and then you would turn that on. That's what the maximum presence is for, is when the stomp switch is engaged and this light's on. All right, so I have this controlling presence and level as well. You can do the same thing to set up the level. This just gives you a solo boost to kind of, step out in front of the mix. All right. Let's look at footswitch 2. So, by the way, we're just on the middle pickup just for consistency here. Again, you're in just a stock setting. That's your bass sound. Hit footswitch 2. We're going to add in some overdrive. is a lot of the way that snapshot mode would work, except again with stomp switches we have the ability to combine all these different parameter changes for different combinations instead of just one setting. So foot switch 2 is going to change drive 1 from 1.4 to 7, drive 2 1 to 3.5, and then also we're compensating for the level with channel volume here. 8.0, it moves down to 7 when the light is on, when foot switch 2 is on. And this just makes sure that we have this the consistent volume between the mildly overdriven sound and the more heavy gain sound. Lastly, this is the one that's most complicated. This is for foot switch 1. We're going to be switching between pick and fingers mode, or if you're using a slide, we hit foot switch 1, light goes on, and now we're in slide mode with all the settings I have here. So running through this here, foot switch 1 is going to change the bias in the amp block, bias X control, the cut, which is essentially like the tone control on a Vox style amp. Foot switch 1 is also controlling the tone. It's a different kind of thing here. And then, most importantly, it's changing the wet and dry level. So essentially, A level is the level of the path here. When we're bypassed, most of our tone is coming through the A. So we're mostly getting the dry sound. When we hit foot switch 1, it reduces to -10 decibels from the dry path. The B path comes from -5 decibels up to 0 decibels. So we get more signal coming through these two compressors. And lastly, foot switch 1 also engages an EQ here, which is suited to work well with slide. I like to add a little bit of bass in there, and some of these other controls, a little bit more of a high cut. So quick demo of how this would work. If you're playing pick and fingers, I would keep the first foot switch off. And then when you want to switch to playing with the slide, we're getting a lot more compression and just a different character of overdrive because the bias control is changing here, right? We can also add in more overdrive now in slide mode. And then we could step out for a solo boost. Sorry, my playing is kind of sloppy. But there's a quick demo for you on all the different modes and how I would like to use Stomp Switch mode on the Stomp. So I hope this video was helpful to you in one way or another. Stay tuned to the free Helix preset playlist. Link is in the description. And if you're interested, you can pick up my complete Helix library. It's 50 presets. It's just a donation of $5 or more, whatever you feel like it's worth. There's information in the description for that. Lastly, I just have one question. I'd love to hear about how you're using the HX Stomp. Are you using it by itself, or are you using it with some other pedals? Are you using it just for amp and cabinet simulation like I do primarily? Or are you using it for just effects and you're using it with a real amp? Let me know what your rig is. I'm interested to hear what your opinions are on the HX Stomp and how you're using it. So thanks for checking out this video. Stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next one.